On June 6, 1944, as American, British, and Canadian forces stormed the beaches of Normandy, German reserves that could have turned the tide of the invasion remained frozen in place near Calais, more than 200 miles away. They stayed there not because of strategic miscalculation or communication failures, but because of a single man who had spent 2 years crafting the most elaborate lie in military history. Juan Pujol Garcia, a Spanish chicken farmer turned double agent, had convinced the German High Command that the massive invasion unfolding in Normandy was nothing more than a feint, and that the real attack would come at Calais within days. In hotel rooms and safe houses across London, German intelligence officers were reading Pujol's reports and believing every word. Even as the fate of Nazi Germany was being decided on beaches, their reserves could have reached in a matter of hours. Juan Pujol Garcia was the most unlikely spy in history, a man whose greatest qualification for intelligence work was his complete lack of qualifications. Born in Barcelona in 1912, he had failed at virtually every conventional career he had attempted. He had been a poultry farmer, a hotel manager, and a cinema owner, never achieving success in any of these endeavors. He had no military training, no language skills beyond Spanish, and no connections to the intelligence services of any nation. What he did have was an extraordinary imagination, an almost pathological attention to detail, and a burning hatred of fascism that drove him to volunteer his services to anyone who would help defeat Hitler. In 1941, Pujol approached the British embassy in Madrid, offering to spy for Britain against Nazi Germany. The British, unimpressed by this unknown Spanish civilian, politely declined his services. Undeterred, Pujol made the same offer to German intelligence, who were equally uninterested in recruiting an amateur with no apparent skills or connections. A conventional person might have given up at this point, but Pujol was not conventional. If neither side would hire him as a spy, he would become a spy anyway, and prove his value through results. Working entirely on his own, Pujol began fabricating intelligence reports for the Germans, claiming to be operating from London while actually sitting in Lisbon, with nothing but a tourist guidebook to Britain and copies of British newspapers that were weeks out of date. He invented a network of fictional sub-agents throughout Britain, each with carefully constructed backgrounds and specialties. He created detailed reports about British military installations he had never seen, troop movements he could only imagine, and strategic plans he completely invented. The remarkable thing was that his reports were so detailed and convincing that German intelligence began to take notice. The Germans, desperately hungry for intelligence about British activities, began to appreciate what they saw as Pujol's exceptional work. His reports matched their expectations about British capabilities and intentions, and his fictional network of agents seemed to provide exactly the kind of comprehensive coverage that German intelligence needed. They gave him the codename Arabel and began providing him with funding and sophisticated communication equipment. What they didn't realize was that they were investing in the greatest work of fiction ever created for military purposes. British intelligence, monitoring German communications, began to notice references to this highly productive German agent operating in Britain. When they realized that Arabel was actually Juan Pujol Garcia, the same man they had dismissed a year earlier, they quickly brought him to London and gave him the codename Garbo in recognition of his extraordinary acting abilities. Now working officially for British intelligence, Pujol found himself in the unique position of being Germany's most trusted agent in Britain, while actually working to destroy them. Under British guidance, Pujol expanded his fictional network to 27 imaginary sub-agents, each with detailed personal histories and specialized knowledge. There was a Welsh former seaman who worked in the Liverpool docks and reported on shipping activities. There was a Venezuelan student studying at Glasgow University who could observe military activities in Scotland. There was a Swiss businessman who travelled throughout Britain and could report on industrial production. There was even a fanatic Welsh nationalist who hated the English so much that he was willing to help Germany defeat them. The genius of Pujol's deception lay not just in its scope, but in its psychological sophistication. He understood that the most convincing lies are those that contain elements of truth. So he would include accurate but harmless information in his reports to establish credibility, then surround it with carefully crafted fiction. He would report real events, but with subtle distortions that supported the narrative he was trying to create. He would acknowledge failures and setbacks to make his reports seem authentic, but frame them in ways that supported German misconceptions about Allied capabilities and intentions. As 1944 approached and the Allies prepared for the invasion of Europe, Pujol's network became the centerpiece of Operation Fortitude, the massive deception plan designed to convince the Germans that the invasion would come at Calais rather than Normandy. Pujol's fictional agents reported seeing exactly what the Allies wanted the Germans to believe: massive troop concentrations in southeast England, construction activities consistent with preparations for a cross-channel attack against Calais, and communications traffic suggesting that the Normandy landings, when they came, were nothing more than a diversion. The critical moment came in the hours immediately following the Normandy landings. German commanders, receiving reports of the massive invasion, had to decide whether to commit their reserves to counter the attack or wait for what might be an even larger invasion elsewhere. This was exactly the decision point that Operation Fortitude had been designed to influence, and everything depended on whether the Germans still believed Pujol's reports. In a message sent just hours after the Normandy landings began, Pujol reported that his network had observed continued preparations for a major invasion force in southeast England, apparently unaffected by the Normandy operations. He suggested that the Normandy attack, while larger than expected, was consistent with intelligence his network had previously provided about Allied deception plans. The real invasion, he warned, would come at Calais within days, and the Germans should not be distracted by what was happening in Normandy. The German response exceeded the Allies' most optimistic expectations. Not only did they keep their reserves in the Calais area, but they actually reinforced them, pulling troops from other sectors to prepare for the invasion that Pujol had warned them was coming. Entire armoured divisions that could have reached Normandy in time to influence the battle remained in place, waiting for an attack that existed only in Juan Pujol Garcia's imagination. For weeks after D-Day, as Allied forces struggled to break out from their Normandy beachheads, German reserves continued to wait near Calais for the main invasion. Pujol's reports continued to flow, explaining delays in the Calais attack due to weather conditions, logistical difficulties, and security concerns. The Germans believed every word, partly because Pujol's reports matched their own strategic assumptions about where the Allies would attack, but mainly because they had come to trust him implicitly over the previous 3 years. The full extent of Pujol's achievement only became clear after the war, when captured German intelligence files revealed how completely they had been deceived. German intelligence officers had rated Pujol as their most valuable agent, someone whose reports were considered so reliable that they influenced strategic decisions at the highest levels of the Nazi hierarchy. They had paid him over £20,000 for his information, a fortune at the time, and had awarded him the Iron Cross, one of Germany's highest military decorations. The British, recognizing Pujol's extraordinary contribution to the Allied victory, awarded him the Order of the British Empire. He remains the only person in history to have received high military decorations from both sides in the same war, a testament to his skill at deception and his crucial role in the Allied victory in Europe. Military historians estimate that his deception operation saved thousands of Allied lives by keeping German reserves away from the crucial battles following D-Day. Juan Pujol, Garcia's story reminds us that in warfare, as in life, truth is often less important than perception. The German army that waited near Calais for an invasion that never came was just as real as the one that fought in Normandy. But it might as well have been on the moon for all the good it did the German cause. Pujol's lies didn't change the physical reality of the war, but they changed how the Germans perceived that reality, and in doing so, they changed the course of history. Today, in an age of satellite surveillance and electronic intelligence, it might seem impossible for one man with nothing but imagination and determination to influence the outcome of a world war. But Pujol's legacy reminds us that the human element remains crucial in warfare and intelligence. Technology can gather information and analyze data, but it takes human insight to understand how that information will be interpreted and how those interpretations will influence decisions. Juan Pujol Garcia possessed that insight in extraordinary measure, and he used it to help free Europe from Nazi tyranny with nothing more than the most powerful weapon ever invented, a perfectly crafted lie.